Well, Jim, have you got a grandfather joke for us today?
It's not a grandfather joke, but it's an old joke.
Okay, let's hear it.
Seems like during President Trump's first term, somebody came in from the real rural parts of Mississippi to Tupelo and was standing in front of Jack Reed's store and saw this box that had looked like movies going on and different people talking and all sorts of things. And he decided he just had to have one of those things. It was fabulous. He'd never seen anything like it. So he went in and he bought a TV. Took it back to the farm. Next day, turned it on. And all he got when he first turned it on was Donald Trump. So he turned the knob and it was Donald Trump. And he turned it to another channel. It was Donald Trump. So after about 5 or 6 of these, he called Reed's and complained that his TV wasn't working. So they sent a technician out. Technician checked out his TV inside, and it was working fine. And he asked him, he said, well, where's your antenna? He said, it's outside. So the technician went outside, was out there about 2 minutes, came back in, turned the TV on. There was the dating game. The next channel had Wheel of Fortune. Next channel had Turner Classic Movies. He said, that's great. What'd you do? He said, well, you had your antenna hooked up to your manure spreader.
Okie dokie. We will take that, Jim. Thank you for that. Jim had his teeth cleaned today. He dropped them off at 9 o'clock, and he's going to pick them up later this afternoon.
Yeah.
God.
Dry cleaners.
Each week we discuss kitchen table issues that all of us face in Mississippi. Not only will we discuss those issues, but offer information from experts in their field with solutions or plan of action. As most of you know, we focus a lot of attention on public education, healthcare, our prison system, voting rights, and Mississippi taxes. Today, we have a guest that has firsthand knowledge and experience in all of those issues and how Mississippians, especially forgotten and neglected Mississippians. Our guest is Greta Kemp Martin. She is a litigation director for Disability Rights Mississippi. She was formerly an associate attorney at Langston & Langston, as well as formerly with Canopy Children's Solution. She is a graduate of Mississippi College of Law and an Ole Miss graduate, and she was the Democratic candidate in 2023 for Attorney General. Greta, it is so good to see you and so good to talk to you today.
Yes, thank you both for having me. This is wonderful. Get to spend some time with you too.
Good. And I want to say to everybody, Greta is one of my favorite people. She has such a passion for what she believes in, and she has, as we like to call, a servant's heart. And that's something that we don't see quite a bit today. So, Greta, let's get right into it, and tell us about the organization Disability Rights Mississippi.
Yeah, so Disability Rights Mississippi, DRMS, it's the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Mississippi. There's one in every state and territory across the country, at least for now. We are tasked with protecting the rights of Mississippians with disabilities. And while we have several partner agencies across the state that do that, we're unique in the fact that we have a legal arm, which is where I come in. So not only are we able to provide advocacy services across several issues, education, civil rights, voting, things like that, but if if the need goes beyond just general advocacy, we have the ability to represent people in court. And we do that on an individual basis, or if it's a systemic issue, we're able to do bigger, more impactful litigation. So, for example, we can represent people in employment discrimination cases, but we also have filed lawsuits against state agencies to fix the problem, right? Not just to go in and help one person, but to fix the entire system. So we're very
How does
unique
that
in
work
that.
with public schools? Public schools are prohibited by federal law from discriminating against students with disabilities. And they can't deny them equal rights. And they've got to allow them to participate in extracurricular activities and school technology and health services, etc. But it seems to me that accountability is not the same for charter schools and private schools. Because I know of cases where students with disabilities, the public schools provided more benefits to the student than the private school did.
Right.
And yet they were forced to do it.
Right, and that's actually a limitation that we have at our agency, because our access authority, which allows us to go and monitor and investigate schools and jails and mental health facilities, actually stops at the door of charter and private schools, because they don't receive any state or federal funding. So it is a limitation, and unfortunately, in my opinion, it's a gap in our federal laws that it doesn't extend to those educational settings. We have problems all the time within the walls of private facilities that we can't get into.
So the public law, the law that governs public education and disabilities, does not apply to private schools or charter schools?
It does, but it's a lot harder to prove that they have committed discriminatory practices, because it's so hard to get any oversight within those facilities.
Okay.
And I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but also the charter schools, the private schools, they can pick and choose the students that they want. So if they've got to go to extra to allow or to admit, maybe a better term, a student with special needs, then they probably don't even want that student there. Is that a
Right.
fair
Right.
statement? And
That's a very fair statement. And let's say, for example, if a student with special needs slips through in the admissions process, once that student's on campus, there's a very unlikely chance they're going to get the full range of services they need, because that school doesn't believe that they are entitled to provide those extra services, right? You're almost like, we've gifted you the ability to be on this special campus. Why should we provide you more services than any other child? And that's, as we know, some children need additional services. And again, the problem is getting into these private and charter schools for any type of oversight. I mean, it's like Fort Knox. Our public schools may be lacking in a lot of areas, but we certainly have oversight on those facilities, including my agency that is able to go in and monitor.
Well, how do you feel about the recent legislation that allows homeschooled and, I believe, private or charter schools to participate in extracurricular activities at public schools, even though they're not enrolled there?
We are very much against that legislation. If you are being educated in a separate setting that is being funded privately or being funded, by your own pocket, I don't believe you have a place in publicly funded sports.
Should they not, or let me rephrase it, will they have to measure up to the standards of public schools in order to be eligible to participate in the extracurricular activities?
So I think that's a variable that we don't know right now. I think, in my opinion, if you're being educated outside of the public school system, that should exclude you from those extracurricular activities. You're taking away an opportunity that could be given to children who are rightfully in the public school system. And you're being waged up against students who are going through a public school system separate and apart from the other educational settings that we have. And it
I th-
certainly, in my opinion, raises a issue of liability on the part of, we expect certain safety standards to be applied with our public school extracurriculars that we are not as clear are being applied in private school settings. You're
Yeah.
talking about apples and oranges.
yeah. I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of homeschoolers that are not, let me say, parents of homeschoolers that they not really for this, especially if they've got to turn over information to people, to school people, to school officials. I don't, I think that's a much ado about nothing, as far as homeschoolers. They have their choice. But I do want to ask you this. What about, is there any resources that parents of homeschoolers that have disabilities, are there any resources from them from Disability Rights Mississippi?
Oh, absolutely. We have a whole team that's focused on children's rights. It's actually a children's rights team, and they assist children who are in public school settings, private school settings, anyone in an educational environment. We are always happy to provide referrals, resources, and advocacy services. And we're a pro bono, free of charge service to any Mississippian who needs our. So we've got some wonderful advocates with educational backgrounds that are astounding, and they've been advocates for decades. So we certainly are willing to help anyone, no matter their educational setting, because we want to make sure that no matter what setting a child's in, that they are getting the services they need.
Gotcha. One of the things that I found out in the past couple of years about education with, and especially children with autism or special disabilities, that there was some issue, and maybe it's been cleared up now, as far as IEP. And remind me, what is IEP, and how does that affect special needs students?
So an IEP is an individual educational plan or individualized education plan. And so what those are done, IEPs are created by utilizing a team of people who are involved in a child's educational life. So it can include the parent, it can include teachers, administrators. These people come together and wrap around the student and provide support services and come up with an educational plan that suits that particular student. So a child with disabilities isn't boxed into the standard educational setting that a public school might provide, right? So we have found through the years that not every child learns the same way, not every child focuses the same way, and so individual education plans are developed through a team. It is the responsibility of the school to implement that plan. And so a lot of times people reach out to Disability Rights Mississippi when their school fails to uphold the IEP plan. So a lot of times our advocates are going in to educate and help the school implement the plan that services the child best. And those
That's
plans are renewed annually, so they're looked at every year.
that's great information, and thank you for that. We've had the opportunity to talk to Nancy Loom with the Parents Campaign. We've had a chance to talk to Erica Jones with the MAE, Mississippi Association of Educators. So thank you for that information. Let's talk about, and I've gone through some of your reports that's on your website. What's your website?
drms.ms.
There's some great information on that. Let's talk about our prison systems for a bit, and tell us about the work that your organization and you are doing within the prison system.
So, as part of the access authority that we're mandated through Congress, we are able to go in and monitor, investigate any facility that provides services and programs to people with disabilities. And as you can imagine, our prisons and jails house people with mental illness, people with other disabilities. So Disability Rights Mississippi started monitoring MDOC, the Department of Corrections facilities, around 2018, the beginning of 2019. And what we observed was a substantial lack of adequate medical and mental health care. That was the overarching problem. But as we dug into that, we saw that there were also issues with people with disabilities being provided accommodations. And an example of that would be um, uh, an individual who had a disability that was denied work services, right? So they weren't able to participate in work services on campus in order to earn money and to order good time, for potential release. So we have been monitoring that fairly regularly for the last 5 years, and providing that data both to the Department of Corrections as well as the Mississippi Legislature. We submitted a report back in 2021 of our findings on the medical and mental health care, and we just haven't seen a whole lot of substantial improvement in that. So we filed a lawsuit back in 2022. That lawsuit has since been dismissed, but we are still working on the ground in MDOC facilities, and will likely file suit again in the future.
Could I
Gotcha.
kind of go back to education for just a second? Representative Hood has a bill to, I guess, outlaw or take away the DEI, diversity, etc. And it seems to me that ever since we started with integration back in the 50s, there's been a push and a thought that exposure to everybody, every color, every race, handicapped, non-handicapped, whatever, is good for education. What Mr. Hood is trying to do is eliminate DEI in the state of Mississippi? And does that not affect handicapped students
Yes.
in public school?
Yes. DEI is not only good for schools, it's good for our state. It's good for the country. It's good for the world. Knowing and seeing other people's experiences and being surrounded by different people, it's just a natural way to be. It's just wonderful. And what I don't think that people understand is the DEI programs include accessibility programs, and that includes things that affect people with disabilities. So the accommodations that a person might enjoy at school or work, slashing a DEI program could take that away. There is a lawsuit right now out of Texas that's attacking Section 504 of the rehabilitation plan. Well, that's a direct attack to IEPs. And if you think that they won't come after the Americans with Disabilities Act, then you haven't been paying attention. These are small steps that are being taken to eliminate what they have swept in front of you as DEI, but it is responsible. DEI is responsible for some programs that positively impact so many Mississippians that I don't believe they're going to realize what's happened until it's taken away from them. And anything that promotes inclusion and accessibility, that directly affects people with disabilities.
And whenever it happens in Mississippi first, it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, and there's going to be other states jumping in at the same time.
Right.
And
Oftentimes you'll hear it said DEIA, and the A stands for accessibility. So it's oftentimes diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is a target on people with disabilities.
Well, I was up in DeSoto County last week, and I mentioned to David, I was behind a van, and the van had a license plate. And apparently in DeSoto County, there are license plates issued by the state that are DEI and then the magnolia and then the numbers.
I'm sure that that is a fluke.
Yeah.
Uh, you
Don't
know,
tell
and
Shad White.
good point. Good
I love
point.
it.
That's. Do you find that there's a lot of these organizations, a lot of these that we talked about, maybe some of the schools and some of the prisons that are not ADA compliant, especially maybe in the prisons?
Oh yes. Oh yes. And you're looking at both structural. So there's a difference between structural accessibility and like programmatic accessibility. So the structural is your building, right? There's not a ramp. The doors are not wide enough. But your programmatic accessibility is actually a bigger problem in that the programs within some of these facilities aren't open to people with disabilities, and so that could be as simple as programs that are open to individuals who are incarcerated may not be accessible to somebody with a disability. So they aren't able to take part in services while they're incarcerated that everyone might be able to take part in. And that's important, right? Because we want individuals who are incarcerated, it's a rehabilitation piece that we want them to find services or programs or a trade or an employment that they can then transition back into their community. But if that's not accessible to people with disabilities, about 76% of your inmate population have some kind of disability. So that's 76% of people who can't participate. And so what kind of future are we setting up for them once they transition out of incarceration?
Gotcha. One of the things I do want to give a shout out to our House of Representative member, Justice Gibbs, who recently was able to pass through the House a law giving protection equipment to
Mhm.
incarcerated people. So, and we read about a story, and I can't recall the woman's name, who basically, because of the chemicals that she was coming in touch with, that she's now in stage 4 cancer. Now, as far as voting rights for the disability, how does that work, and what's going on with that?
So we receive a specific stream of funding through the Help America Vote Act that allows us to assist with voter assistance for people with disabilities. And so every year around election time, we work on the accessibility of polling sites, which it's not great, especially in our more rural counties. Unfortunately, our Secretary of State, Michael Watson, has not been receptive to that data. He sends us to the election commissioners, which is sometimes a circus, depending on what county you're in. Election commissioners are sometimes involved and sometimes not. So we've been really struggling with the accessibility piece of polling sites. But overarchingly, outside of our Help America Vote Act money, we were part of the group that litigated against the ballot harvesting legislation a couple of years ago. There was legislation that was passed that really put in danger the people that, like caretakers and family members that help people with disabilities and helped our elders to vote. And so there was a potential criminal penalty put on caretakers and people that might assist people in getting their ballots mailed. And us, along with Southern Poverty Law and ACLU, we were able to litigate that, and we got that law reversed. And caretakers are protected, and it was a big win for us, especially for those in the disability community that rely on others to help them vote, right? But our day-to-day voting rights work is really more focused on the accessibility of polling sites and just trying to break through the fact that we have people in like Issaquena County voting out of a FEMA trailer that doesn't have a ramp. I mean, it's a consistent problem. We have multiple complaints every election day, but it's almost like we're chasing our tail because once we get one fixed, like 14 pop up, and so that's an ongoing struggle and something that unfortunately we can only do around election day because a lot of these voting precincts are temporary precincts. So every election day, the entire office sets out and we do polling monitoring across the state. We put on our sneakers and we head out and boots on the ground checking them out. But we're working very hard to make sure that polling sites are accessible, just physically accessible to people.
Well, when they're not accessible, and I can only speak in Tupelo, when they're not accessible, our circuit clerk and the polling site managers, when they have time, will come out to the car
Oh, good.
and
That's
bring a
good.
ballot and provide the handicapped person the opportunity to vote. And apparently, from what I understand, in a number of places in the 1st Congressional District, that is not an option. The circuit clerks just say, nope, we're not doing it,
Yeah.
and they don't.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see that across the state. Or even if you have a poll site manager who's willing to do that, if someone with a disability pulls up to the polling precinct by themselves and there's no number posted to alert the poll manager to come out, I mean, there's a communication gap there as well. So even if you have a polling manager, some of these locations, they don't give them the ability to like alert the polling manager that they're there. And the fix for that is that there's supposed to be a poll worker posted outside to assist with curbside voting. And we see almost an 85% failure across the board on that.
Why,
There's supposed to be
why is
somebody
it?
outside looking for that.
Why is it that polling places are not subject to the Disabilities Act?
So mainly because a vast majority of polling precincts serve as something else, right? So
The
you have
churches.
churches, you have circuit clerks' offices, you have some voting precincts are temporary, right? They pop up a trailer just for the day of voting. So that's where, because there are certain sections of the ADA that apply to certain facilities. So there's a title of the ADA that applies to public places. There's certain things that don't apply to churches. There's certain things that don't apply to private places. So that's where it gets hard. The ADA doesn't apply to polling places because um, polling places are oftentimes other things. And so, because of the temporary status of polling precincts, it's hard to apply the Americans with Disabilities Act to that. But you can look at the underlying facilities. So, let's say if it's done at a church that's not accessible, you can look at how the ADA applies to that church. And then it would be up to the church to make it accessible because the church has held themselves out to be an accessible polling precinct. So that's where it gets complicated, is that you're not looking at it as a polling precinct. You have to look at it as what it functions as normally. And
It seems to me that
churches are a bad example because we do find churches to be accessible. So I hate to keep picking on churches, but that's
right.
churches are usually our most accessible sites because they obviously want to be accessible for their parishioners. So those are always good ones. So I don't mean to pick on churches.
I know we've got a bunch of legislators that would like to see the voter suppression, but personally, I would like to see polling places subject to having that ADA compliance because the only thing we have is our vote.
Agreed.
And
And
if we are denied that vote, then we have no voice in our government.
And separate and apart from accessibility, if anybody, any of y'all's listeners, or even you, calling Senator Jeremy England and thanking him for that early voting bill, I mean, that bill is great. That is the disability community was happy to see it. I love seeing senators and legislators able to work across the aisle. I don't care what our governor says about it. That was an awesome piece of legislation that's going to go so far for Mississippians. Early voting is there's nothing wrong with early voting, and it is so helpful to people with disabilities. We were really happy, and kudos to Senator England for that work.
Hopefully, if the governor vetoes it, there's enough votes to override his veto,
Right.
because it certainly is a law that is very favorable to
Yes.
everybody.
And favorable to Republicans. I believe I read that it was
Of
part of the
course.
Republican platform. I mean, this is it's fights to pick a fight, and we have it's just ridiculous. It's
Yep.
silliness. Is what it is.
Well, thank you for bringing up Senator England. Thank you for that, because yeah, that's quite important. And
You
we
ready
do
for the
appreciate
canary in the coal mine?
the canary in the coal mine, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what is the canary of the coal mine?
Well, the last time she ran for attorney general, she ran
Okay, we're talking about
as
Attorney General Lynn
an advocate
Fitch.
for women's choice.
Okay,
And despite everybody's talking, she did not get elected. What happened? What happened? What didn't turn out the way you thought it should? Where was the shortcomings?
I mean, frankly, as Attorney General Fitch had too much money. I mean, she was going to beat me on money all day long. And as much as I hate to admit it, and we probably all hate to admit it, money is a driving force behind politics. And I don't know that there's enough people statewide that's ready for a loud female Democrat who is very pro-choice, and says some of the things that I say. I mean, I really wanted to be frank and honest about my beliefs and my positions, because I think they will make for a better Mississippi. And I just don't know that there were enough people ready to mark yes beside a Democrat who was as vocal as I was, specifically around choice and women's health.
Well, the interesting thing to me was that Jim Hood ran as, and so did Brandon Presley. Neither of them got elected. So I think you're on the right track. And I would hope that this time around, the Democratic Party will become a financial supporter of yours with a sufficient amount of money. Because it's my understanding that Attorney General Finch is considering running for governor.
That's my understanding.
So it could be a wide open race, and I think your name recognition, I think you're sitting in a very good position.
It's
What are you laughing about, David?
So what, Greta, I think what Jim is trying to ask, or wants to ask, or leading up to, do you have other political aspirations in the future?
I do.
Okay.
We are looking at a few things, and Attorney General is one of them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. We appreciate that, and that is good to know. And you know that you know who your supporters are, and you know that we will help you wherever we can. One of the things that you brought up briefly, and it's also in your one of your reports, was about unlicensed personal care homes. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so personal care homes are licensed through the Department of Health. They serve, when they are licensed and they are appropriate, they serve as a very good transition piece for people transitioning out of mental health institutions, prisons, jails. It's a good, like, halfway house type model, but they also provide medical assistance and support. That's when they're licensed. But unfortunately, Mississippi has like a plague of what we call unlicensed personal care homes. It's homes operating under the under the radar, without licensure. The regulations do not provide any type of oversight or enforcement or penalty for these operators who run these homes.
Wait a minute. You don't
And
have to have a certificate of need?
uh, you're supposed to, but these folks are operating under the black of night. They're not. They have not done anything that they're supposed to do. They're not applied for a license, certificate of need, or anything.
And who's
Um,
supposed to enforce that?
there's nobody who is responsible for enforcing that.
Really?
No one. It is a hole in our regulation. And so what DRMS has started doing is we stepped in and have been filing lawsuits against unlicensed personal care homes for injunctive relief to shut them down or make them get a license.
Good.
But we can't continue that, right? Because when I say there are hundreds of these across the state, there are hundreds. And we've been doing this for about 2 years with these injunctions, and we submitted our data to the legislature. And unfortunately, we did not get any type of response. There were only 2 bills this year that had anything to do with personal care homes, and they died in committee before we could even get in to see if there was a way that we could piggyback onto that. Um, so we are going to keep fighting the fight against these unlicensed care homes, but I mean these are things that often end in tragic endings. I mean,
Yeah.
we have unlicensed personal care homes that people have died because they weren't appropriately, set up for safety precautions. So we had one here in the Jackson area. 2 individuals died because there was a fire and there were no proper fire precautions because they were not properly licensed. We've had individuals die from, being in inclement weather too long. I mean, these are just third world conditions that these individuals are forced to live in because they have no other option. And
Do these homes, are they
they're,
eligible to
they're
collect
paying these
Medicaid?
operators rent, and the operators are keeping the rent money and not providing appropriate resources and conditions.
Do they get Medicaid support?
No,
They don't.
no,
And they
uh,
don't have a certificate of need.
no.
And the law requires them to have a certificate of need.
And yes, and the law requires them to have a license.
So I would be safe to say that Attorney General Finch is not doing her job.
Shocker. You would be correct.
This,
I hate to bring up Musk because I really don't like Mr. Musk. But the public is tired of government agents not doing their job. And here we have a good instance of where our oldest citizens, most of them critically, or not critically ill, but have severe problems, are not being properly taken care of. And Attorney General Finch sits by and watches it happen.
And the most severe cases that we've come across, we've reported it to the AG's office, and requested their assistance because they have a larger level of law enforcement than we do. And we've gotten no response.
Can't they just hire an outside attorney like they do so many things and farm it out?
You would think.
I mean,
But
I think I could have.
we don't even get a response anymore. Yeah. So we've asked the legislature to amend the regulations so that whether it's the AG or the Department of Health, that there's some kind of teeth, some kind of enforcement that is punitive toward these unlicensed operators so that it stops them from opening homes. Because the problem is with what I'm doing, I'll file a lawsuit, I'll get an injunction, I'll shut down John Doe on Easy Street. Well, he'll just go over and open something up on, Martin Luther King Boulevard, right? Like he's just going to move his home and then I got to sue that home. So I am a Band-Aid on a bullet wound at this point. Like we don't have law enforcement or anything punitive that I can put on them that would stop it forever, right? Like there needs to be some type of criminal charge or criminal remedy for these people who are operating these homes without license. And there's just nothing there. And, I don't know, maybe that's why the AG is not handling it, because there's nothing that's in the regs for her to do. But I can tell you that if her office investigated the ones we sent to her, criminal activity would be found. Because when we get an inkling that something's happening, whether it be drugs, human trafficking, which is her favorite buzzword, or anything that we believe is suspicious, we send it to the AG's office, because that's above our pay grade. We need law enforcement at that point, and we're not getting responses.
David, we need to follow up on this.
Gotcha. It's this is just tragic, and I went to your website earlier, and I did print out a couple of your reports, and I would encourage and invite people to go to the website drms.com.org.
.ms.
.ms. Okay. DRMS at MS.
Or just Google Disability Rights Mississippi. It'll take you right to us.
Perfectly. And please.
David's got short-term memory.
What? No, I'm kidding. What? I pulled out the unlicensed personal care homes, and I would invite everyone to look at that. I pulled out the one about, and we haven't had a chance to get into this, about Medicaid. And so I will ask you a quick question, but I do want to go back to this. Go to the website, look at the education support guide, look at the executive summary for the, this is the Mississippi prisons, as well as we just talked about the unlicensed personal care home. So please go to that website, get that information. Now, one last question, and because we do want to talk about Medicaid, how does that affect people with disability rights or people with disability? And what would the expansion of Medicaid, which Tate Reeves said will never happen, how would expanding the Medicaid, taking those federal dollars, affect Mississippians, and especially Mississippians with disabilities?
Well, people with disabilities are probably, I don't have the data behind this, but I think it's safe to say one of, if not the most reliant population on Medicaid services, period. I don't think I have to Google too hard to find that to be true. And the fact that despite other states showing the success and expansion of Medicaid to open up services and to make services more available to their populations, I mean, the fact that we can't get this done is asinine. It's insane. As we sit here today, you've got Medicaid waivers and Medicaid services that people are on a list that are decades long. And there's nothing we can do about that, because the Fifth Circuit has said that waiting lists are constitutional. But some of these people will die waiting on services. And we have a governor that with a stroke of his pen could have expanded our services to allow for some of these waiting lists to be resolved. And that's what essentially expansion would do. It would open up more providers. It would open up more services. Waiting lists would be probably still present, but much shorter. We wouldn't have people waiting years and years and years to get their family members in for these services that are vital to them living. This is, to me, I feel when I'm talking about Medicaid expansion to people, I feel like I'm an idiot. Like I'm like, what are y'all not getting? Like this is, these are, but to us, that's one of the biggest, there's lots of benefits to expanding Medicaid, but one of the biggest ones we will see is how it will open up and serve more people. And we have people waiting on services right now that they will not get them in their lifetime. They will die waiting on services.
Well, I think an awful lot of people in the state of Mississippi, and for that matter around the country, do not understand what the qualifications are to get Medicaid. And they think that it's wealthy people, people that are making $100,000 a year, etc. Would you care to talk about what you have to be, how you have to be qualified, salary-wise, etc., to be eligible to get Medicaid? Because it doesn't fit everybody.
No, it doesn't. And truly it depends on what services you're going to utilize and what programs you're applying for. But generally, you're not talking about your six-figure individual. I mean, you're talking about people who are making minimum wage, making a base level salary that require these services and that are only the ones that are eligible for these services. These are not people who are able to pay for healthcare in any other way. We serve our population, we serve represents about 62% of those who live below poverty in Mississippi, and we serve almost 100% people who are eligible for Medicaid. So, I mean, I don't have the numbers, but that
What's the
should give
most
you
income you can have and still be eligible for Medicaid?
I believe I believe it's 45,000. I believe. Don't quote me on that because we do not work with eligibility. So we don't help people get on Medicaid. We help them when they're denied. So we don't help with that process. So I'm not as familiar with I just know that our client base are mostly all Medicaid recipients, are at least eligible for Medicaid, and that we serve most people who about 62% are below the poverty level in Mississippi. So to me, when I put that data together, I'm looking at a home of somebody making anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000 a year total. That's we're not looking at people who are rich and able to get health care in other places. But that is something for people that are listening. While we don't assist with people getting on Medicaid services, where we come in is if you are denied. And then we have a team that will assist you in your appeal and making sure that you do qualify for the services that you are applying for, because it is different depending on what waiver or what services you're looking for Medicaid to pay for.
Gotcha. And all of this information is available on your website. Jim, you got anything else to add?
Oh, I've got lots of questions, but we don't have lots of time.
Understood.
I'd love to have you back.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things we could continue to discuss that only would be improvements in Mississippi. In fact, some days I think anything might be an improvement in Mississippi.
Agreed.
I feel like Faulkner a lot of times. If you don't understand Mississippi, you will never understand the world. So,
that's a good one.
Yeah, a lot of it starts here and spreads.
Mm-hmm.
Greta, what can we do for you? What can we do for Disability Rights Mississippi? And any last questions or comments, or what can we do for you?
Well, right now, you gentlemen or anybody listening, there is a major bill going through Congress, U.S. Congress right now to cut Medicaid about $880 billion. That would be about a $9 billion cut to Mississippi, and that's without expansion. So we are encouraging everyone to call our Congress people and have, for whatever it's worth, to vote against this cut, because we need every Medicaid dollar we can get, and a cut would be devastating for Mississippi, even without expansion. So that's been our big ticket item today, is we've asked everyone we know to call and over the next few days and have them vote against that budget bill. So
good. Thank you for that. And please go to drms.ms for more information and to learn about how you can get involved. Also, if you have any questions, comments, things that you'd like to see us talk about, please send me an email at mshappenings1 at gmail.com. That's MS happenings and the number 1 at gmail.com. We would love to hear for you. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate our sponsors. Greta, it's great to see you again and talk to you. And also, we do want to lastly share this with you, and this ties into everything that we're trying to do with the broadcast and also getting with Greta here. May we never become indifferent to the suffering of others.